All right, good day, everyone. Today is June the 7th, 2018, and this is the conference call series that we are recording with attendees for anyone doing volunteer engagement. We started this, I believe, last month was our first call that started with how to use the opportunity queue, and I am uploading the conference call, the Skype, onto YouTube so that it can be available for folks afterwards. And as we have people come on and off our engagement teams in the local chapter and territory areas, they can catch up with the topics where we've already gone. So today I had posted that this is going to be a little bit out of sequence. I had hoped to do this in a more linear fashion, starting with the opportunity queue and going into like what happens next with a volunteer. When a volunteer is brand new, what are the steps that we start to work on so that they can choose an activity and be set on a development path towards that. But since we've started hurricane season, I thought let's just jump ahead quickly this month, go out of sequence a little bit, and talk about how to become a disaster responder on a disaster relief operation quickly. And we'll get back on track with more of the individual development planning next month. So these are all on the schedule to be shared with anyone you feel in your chapter or territory would benefit from learning more about being a volunteer engagement worker. Okay, so right now I have up on my screen the Deploy to a National Disaster, Become a Disaster Responder on a Disaster Relief Operation PDF, which is actually titled How to Deploy Current Volunteers. So this is something that we put together during Hurricane Harvey to quickly get folks up to speed on mass care activities so that we could get them quickly down to Houston and other areas affected by Hurricane Harvey. It's been updated and changed a wee bit so that it can be used more universally, but this is what I send out quickly to help people know if they're responding to a need or if it's tugging at their heartstrings on the news and they start cold calling the offices or showing up, that it's something that we can give to them. I did tweak it so that this is for current volunteers. I have a version also that starts with how to register as a volunteer. So if you have that need, that's available as well. Although some of the conversations we've been having lately with our leadership at the Training Institute, at our staff meeting, our all-region staff meeting this week, etc., I think that there is a little bit more emphasis on let's put our current workforce to use. Let's engage the 600 plus volunteers we already have, rather than sending someone straight off the streets who we don't know necessarily, and that would be my preference as well. So, how to become a disaster responder in a disaster relief operation. This is all forward facing, so this would be providing this to the volunteer, sitting down with the volunteer and explaining to them that our first several weeks of operation on a big disaster would be mass care focused, would be opening and operating shelters, feeding in the shelter, feeding families and individuals, digging out from the disaster, feeding first responders, and distributing supplies for cleanup and comfort. I did not put reunification in here, but that one became fairly big also over the fall months. So reunification would be one, especially if we've got someone who has those softer skills and wants to become involved in that. So asking a volunteer what activity they would be interested in deploying in. And I think always erring on the side of volunteers don't know what they want to do and they need us to over-explain it to them. So before turning them on to the online training, making certain that they understand what a deployment means. It means being away for 2 weeks. It means working 10, 12, 14-hour days. It means a lot of physical labor, and it means a good deal of being the best tired that they've ever been, but wanting to make certain that they understand what they are getting into if they're going to join us. So I know that a lot of the chapters and territories hosted day-and-a-half long trainings, which had volunteers, not necessarily certified basic instructors. That would be the preference, but not necessarily certified basic instructors, but certainly people who had deployment experience hosting these day-and-a-half long training opportunities where we had new or newer volunteers coming in to sit down in front of the computer, shine it up on the wall over a projector to take disaster cycle services and overview, which gives a good summary of what we do overall. And then deployment fundamentals, which I think really does let our folks know and understand what they can be, what they can expect, how we take care of them, what is their own responsibility, and this one stopping it several times or really following it up after the deployment fundamentals is concluded for the day with a lot of question and answer from people who have the skills and experience to answer those questions. In particular, trying to reflect back to the volunteer, to the disaster responder, that it is a chaotic and dynamic atmosphere and that they really need to advocate for themselves. Please don't wait for your supervisor to remember that you exist, but speak up and ask how you can help. In addition to the flexibility that is overly used, and people get really tired of hearing about being flexible, but it also happens to be true. So starting with the disaster cycle services overview and deployment fundamentals on EDGE, and then any of their specific courses for the activity that they have chosen, if they're going to go in disaster fundamentals. And if you will please remember, I have been sharing lately that we are to be updating everybody on shelter fundamentals. They need to be taking the version that has been available since January of 2017. So anyone who took it in 2016 needs to update it, please. Basic food safety has not changed. Psychological first aid is a requirement for shelter only, especially again following our chat with Dr. Fole on Tuesday during Tuesday's staff meeting. I was going to add it for feeding and DES as well. He thinks it's very valuable, and I don't at all disagree with him. And everyone is welcome, making sure that we know how to welcome folks into a shelter. This is a good opportunity also to have a seasoned shelter worker leading our newer responders, newer volunteers through this activity so they can talk about service animals and comfort animals, etc., and what we can expect and how we need to be accommodating those, and how we need to be aware of our surroundings and who can get up and down some steps. Shower facilities, if we're going to be accepting people who have mobility issues and will need some help with showering and with bathroom. What are our resources available to us? So really having somebody who's been in a larger shelter and knows how to be mindful and aware of pointing a shelter worker, advising shelter workers what to expect and how they could be most useful and helpful. Feeding also, adding the feeding fundamentals and then mass care and overview. Feeding fundamentals, remember version 2 came out in February, March this year, and before we can deploy a feeding worker, they are all supposed to take feeding version 2. So go ahead and start sharing that at volunteer meetings, getting it in front of people who have a feeding background so that we can get everybody up to speed. When it comes time to deploy our workers to a larger operation outside of Kentucky, I'm planning on following that. If they haven't taken feeding version 2, we're not going to send them as a feeding worker. Distribution of emergency supplies is one of the easier ones to get ready, get up and out the door because it has fewer training requirements. So choosing one of those activities, setting them in front of a computer, walking them through this, allowing them to ask plenty of questions. And then we have the EDGE, making sure that we are troubleshooting to the best of our ability, turning off the pop-up blocker. Google Chrome must have the Flash player enabled. Not all courses are good for tablet versus laptop. And there is a known EDGE glitch placed on the Exchange. So any troubles, any problems with EDGE are listed on the Exchange, and any EDGE administrator in our region should be invited to EDGE office hours that take place monthly, once during the workday and once in the evening to accommodate varying schedules. And they're very helpful, and they send out notes afterwards. But this is where our information comes from, so that we can do the best that we can to mitigate disaster, to fix problems on the front end before we need to get to report those problems to the IT service desk. So getting folks prepared to deploy by pointing them to training and by answering the questions and making sure that they are understanding what is going to be required of them is, of course, vital. But we will not be deploying anyone who has not completed the other requirements for being a disaster workforce responder. So getting a completed health status record, the 2-page health document, and the way that we ask our folks to do it in this region is to have the volunteer complete it and to get it as quickly as possible into the hands of the staff wellness worker. Because it is privileged information, because it is private, we want to handle it as a Red Cross staffer, as an AmeriCorps member, as an engagement lead, as little as possible. We want to get it in front of our staff wellness person. So the way that I do it is take it from the volunteer who's just completed it, scan it and email it to our staff wellness, and hand the document back to our volunteer. So he or she can keep it for records, or they can do whatever it is they need to do with their information. If they are not with me, if they're emailing it to me or whatever, if I end up with a hard copy, I'm going to shred the hard copy afterwards. Our staff wellness person on record right now still is Gary Pollock, and he has been away. He has not been that available to us lately, but in a pinch, Judith Schatz is always happy to help us. So getting it in front of her, she wants to know what role they're going to be playing, so she can gauge whether they are physically able to deal with like the physical demands of DES, or whether they're going to be doing more of the casework, so that she can make that determination. So staff, or for the staff wellness, if you're going to reach out to me or reach out to Sean, our direct services manager, to see who is the appropriate person to send it to at the time. All right, so we are to make sure we've got a baseline health status on file so that we know that our people are healthy enough to deploy. And also part of the process is that when our staff wellness person has reviewed the health status record, they are the ones that are flipping the switch in Volunteer Connection that calls this person a disaster responder. When we ask our volunteers to update their availability to deploy in Volunteer Connection, there's a switch that has to be flipped before that can happen. They're not going to have even access to that part of Volunteer Connection unless they have completed all of these requirements. So right now that is our process, is when staff wellness completes the health status records, they flip the switch, and then the volunteers should be able to see updating availability for their to deploy. Also getting a copy of the unexpired driver's license and submitting to a motor vehicles records check. So this is from a back end, from a volunteer engagement. What we are doing is putting the unexpired driver's license information in qualifications in the volunteer's profile, and using the background check section of the volunteer's profile and Volunteer Connection to request a motor vehicle records check, or asking volunteer services to initiate that. Because we need to assume that anyone who is deploying to a disaster operation will be driving a Red Cross vehicle or a Red Cross rented vehicle. Usually there's not time to stop and ask if they have an unexpired driver's license and have completed a motor vehicle records check and are green and ready to go. It's just assumed. So most people, some people will say, you know, people without a driver's license can't deploy. And in this region and in this division, we do deal with that on a case-by-case basis. It is a special case, just needs to be checked through our process and sent up to resource mobilization support to make certain that's okay. So we will deploy somebody without a driver's license, but the process is to have both of these things on record before they deploy, if possible. That is, unless they don't have a driver's license and cannot drive. Then, once they have this completed, that's when they are able to update their availability to deploy in Volunteer Connection. And again, this is a front-facing document. This is a client-facing document, a volunteer-facing document. So it is telling them to go and look on their profile to see that the disaster responder tab is available for them to put in their availability for the next 3 months. They can do 3-month chunks, and we can call them for that. I know that Volunteer Connection has changed the way it looks a little bit lately, and this has not pictorially been updated. The instructions are roughly the same, and I think probably most people who are at least a tad bit tech savvy can follow this in the meantime, but we will be getting this updated so that it has pictures that more closely match what is on Volunteer Connection right now. So it also shows them to where they can look for their gaps, and in a minute I'm going to switch to what we should be doing behind the scenes as folks who deploy our workers, but it lets them know where they can be looking for their training to show up on Volunteer Connection and their gaps on Volunteer Connection, and it tells them to add their hours for the training that they have done to prepare, but not to add the DRO hours, because that is done automatically, 10 hours per day for all of the days that they are deployed, including their days off. So I'm going to leave the How to Deploy Current Volunteers PDF that is for our volunteers preparing to deploy, unless there are any questions I can answer about that right now. Anybody got questions? Alrighty. Okie dokie. So I'm trying to drag. Come on, thing. Can't drag my thing over. There we go. All right. So here we go. This is a document that has been in existence for a good while for our disaster workforce engagement team. Previously, our disaster DWMT management team, disaster workforce management team. In Kentucky right now, we don't have much of a formal structure for this. We have been trying to encourage amongst the chapters and territories to find local engagement team members who can be the right hand of the DPM and DPS to engage their volunteers. And I know that there are several of the AmeriCorps members on the call today, and that's a great way to use your AmeriCorps members. And in 2018-19 service year, we expect to formalize that. Nonetheless, we also want team members that we can rely on in the territories and chapters. And I also know that several of you have been working on getting people who will at least fulfill some bits of the DWET role, some bits of the engagement. Maybe you have some that are more about welcoming new volunteers and providing an orientation, and some that are more about helping your new volunteers get training or on a training path, and some who are willing and able to help during deploying locally or outside of Kentucky. So however we are trying to get that accomplished right now, that's not necessarily following this process. This process is written for if you have someone in your territory who is responsible for deploying your workforce, he will follow this process. If not, the DPM, DPS will follow this process. So this is the way it has been working, and there are a few modifications also following Harvey to this as well. So formally, how do we activate the disaster workforce engagement team or whoever is doing the deploying in your chapter or territory? Resource mobilization and support, RMS, right now has been Nicole Pribernow. Will send us an email when there is a larger disaster operation either gearing up or underway, and sends that to the DWET members who are identified right now, the DPMs, DPSs, and our RDO. So the Resource Mobilization and Support usually will send us a summary of what's going on. If we have several operations, they will send us a summary of 3 or 4 operations at a time, or 1 or 2 operations at a time, letting us know a little bit of insider information, like what are the priority recruitment needs, what are the fly-to cities so that we can help our people make their plane reservations. It's not a whole lot of information, but it does give us a little bit of a snapshot of what's going on, usually once in the morning and once in the afternoon, depending on how big and how many things are going on at once. So those who are doing deploying in your chapters and territories, we'll ask them to monitor the door daily. Disaster Operation Open Requests, we think it stands for, on Volunteer Connection. In order to get access to that, you do have to take the disaster management training on Volunteer Connection. It's fairly painless. So take the disaster management training on Volunteer Connection and request admin access to the door. So we're getting into the door, and I'll pull it up in front of us in a minute so we can see what it actually looks like and see what open requests are on the door right now. And then we will fulfill them. So I am going to skip down a little bit, since most of the stuff up here at the top of this document is about what it looks like and how to follow the instructions to access the door. I would really like very much for us to, and I know we do, we say to our disaster responders, please update your availability. And I know that they don't. I've known this since I started 2.5 years. If people have complained, we ask them to do it and we know that they don't. I understand that. But especially in a larger operation like Hurricane Harvey, the one-offs, the people who stop me at the water cooler, who say, I'm available to go to California, that information is simply not going to stick in my head. If they would avail themselves of the technology that is there for this purpose, I would be most appreciative of them updating their availability. Or if they tell us, I can go to California, then take a moment and say, let me update your availability in Volunteer Connection for you. Because the entire system is automated. We get a request that says we need 14 recovery caseworker SAs at this location. That's it. That's the extent of our information. We can match that to how many recovery caseworker SAs we have available in Kentucky at the time and match those together. It helps with the efficiency. It helps with getting people out the door, people who are available and are qualified and are ready to go. So they need to hold gaps that they have earned so that we know that that information is accurate. They need to have all of those boxes ticked, the health status record, the driver's license, the motor vehicle records check, and be ready to walk out the door if they are showing availability. Because it is an enormously teeny tiny amount of people who show us their availability, we will also have to inconvenience the other people in our lives, the other volunteers who have not indicated their availability. We will inconvenience them over and over and over because we will have to find more disaster responders. So I am going to switch over to Volunteer Connection and open under Administration, Disaster Management, get into the door. So the door, and fulfilling a staffing request. So we've got a couple of things are in fact on the door right now to be filled. So DRO 610, which is Ellicott City, Maryland, needs some virtual support. It is automated. It's just they want them within 300 miles. They want general SAs who have CAS 2.0 access. They want them general. There are some hardship codes, which I have trouble believing are accurate for general support, virtual support position, but it is automated. So to be able to know where Monica is heading. All right, so Monica, go fill one of these roles, and you might tell them virtual support shouldn't have hardship codes. All right, so we might have a few notes. This is a virtual position. Caseworkers must have CAS access. Caseworkers are reporting to Y. Williams, that's Yolanda Williams, which I appreciate. They started doing that for virtual support, in particular putting your supervisor so that if you got lost in the virtual netherworld, you could at least call your supervisor and ask for help. And then we can fulfill those. And once we click fulfill, it should show anyone in our region who is available, who has updated their availability, has this gap, and is ready to go. And it is loading, and it's going slowly. So we will see who has updated their availability here in Kentucky. It's nobody. That probably is because of the qualifications, because I'm certain we do have some caseworkers who are available. So did you see that it said match gap yes, which means you want to see the people who are available only for this gap, and it said match qualifications yes, meaning you would want to see anyone who has CAS 2.0. Well, we, in Kentucky in particular, are not caught up on our qualifications. So I set that to no. I took out that filter. And then we can see that we've got Carol Gray, who's available, and David Hines, and David Silver, and Jim Pierce, and Joe Baird, and lots of people, looks like, are willing to help out with casework, which does, in fact, happen. Because casework is what our people do sort of by default. So thanks, you guys, for being available. We are not to a point where we need to be calling them and asking them. So let me get back to our process. So we've looked at the door. We monitor it in the morning and in the afternoon. We see if anybody is available for the open positions. We must be able to trust that they are really disaster responders. They really do hold that gap and have the current training for it. They have the health status record, motor vehicle records check, and driver's license on file when we pull that automated list. If not, it's going to go back to the territory to say, fix this. Your person, Bob wants to deploy as a caseworker, and according to Volunteer Connection, he's ready to go, but I've done a spot check, and I know that's not true, so it's going to go back to the territory or chapter and say, work with Bob. Bob can't go until he's fully qualified. Alrighty. So we're going to pull these lists, and we're going to make sure that people are ready and able and qualified to go. And before we do anything about contacting the disaster responder, we're going to make sure that the DPM is in the know. So it says bullet number 3, Roman number 3 is saying coordinate with the DPM in red. And you've got, you guys, your information is listed at the bottom of this, updated to include Claire's. Welcome to the team, Claire, so that you can make sure that we are operating on the most recent information. Like if you have somebody who is currently in the hospital, you know, that's their private personal business, and if the DPM knows about it, that's helpful to say, no, don't call him, or certainly like, don't call him, his dog just died. That's really important information. Because people don't always remember to update their availability when something tragic is going to take them away from what they're doing. But so we coordinate with the DPMs to make sure that they are really ready to go. And then we would give a call out to the volunteer. Bullets number 4 is again reiterating that all of these boxes must be ticked. Are they really a disaster responder? Yes. Are they national or are they local? That's important information. We've got some folks who are really willing to deploy inside Kentucky only, so they have listed their availability as state or regional, and so that we need to pay attention to that. And their health status record cannot be blank. They must have one on file. Do they have any restriction or hardship codes, which means they cannot deploy? The updates to the door that happened a good number of months ago at this point, probably about 6 months ago, if not longer, will stop us if we try to assign somebody who has a hardship code that matches one that is on the operation or that is restricted. There are people who are restricted, and some of these are disciplinary reasons. They are restricted. They have been told they cannot go back out on a disaster until X, Y, and Z is done, or they're on probation. So it will, thankfully, now stop us. It didn't do that when I first came. You could deploy anybody without knowing that that C6 hardship code meant that they really shouldn't go. Does she or he have the appropriate gap, and does the training transcript reflect the gap that is assigned? This is in this document. Y'all, the gaps have simply got to be true. We need our gaps to be true. The folks need to have completed their training and earned the gap. And especially if we've got the how to deploy current workers or how to deploy people who are brand new and are responding to a news story. Once they've completed their shelter worker, their feeding, their bulk training, please update their gaps so that they are on record as being fully trained and ready to go. The gap competencies are also changing a wee bit the way that they appear in the exchange, but they're linked here. We are sort of switching from what gap competencies, how we tick those off and make sure that people are training correctly and have met all the training requirements, and then we're looking more so at the position descriptions instead, but that transition has not been fully made yet. And then it says again, the driver's license, motor vehicle records check, and it's, has she been engaged locally in the last 12 months? That's more of an informal check, as we would like them to practice their skills here at home before they deploy in them, especially to a larger operation. There are sometimes you just don't feel fully trained until you have been mentored on an operation, small or large. Sometimes you really don't feel fully trained until you've experienced it. So those are things to also weigh, and a DPM can be a good that can be a good conversation to have with a DPM, is if they have never deployed, are they really ready for this? Because on-the-job training sometimes is the best way to go. All right, then we are contacting the volunteer. We've checked all of the stuff in Volunteer Connection. We've checked with the DPM, and we contact the volunteer. So we are going to call and ask if they are available to go, yes or no. So if they are available to go, we want to start with the pre-assignment health questionnaire. It is a 10-question, one-page form that basically checks in with how they are physically, how their health is right now. It's making certain that they have not been in the hospital or in the emergency room in the last 6 months. It asks about any changes in medication. Sometimes if you're on some significant medication for a significant health or mental health issue, changing medication can take a little while to adjust to. And the last question on there is, have any of your family members been affected in the disaster? You know, we have just had that wonderful coping conversation with Dr. Full. Maybe it's not always the best idea to respond to a disaster that has left your grandmother homeless. You know, sometimes maybe it is, because that's how you're going to heal and how you're going to help her. And answering yes or to any of these questions does not mean, yes or no to any of these questions does not mean that the disaster responder cannot deploy. It means it has to go to a staff wellness person first, and our staff wellness folks will pick up the phone and give that volunteer a call and have a conversation, and sometimes they will just go, yeah, he's fine, send him on, that's all right. So there's that question for the pre-health questionnaire. So please ask them to be honest about it, because it doesn't mean that we won't send them, it just means that we want to have that conversation. Also, I have been involved in several conference calls lately about some changes coming to staff wellness, where we are going to be going to a less personally intrusive, process, where the disaster responder will simply say he or she is, in fact, ready, willing, and able to go. You know, we provide them the best information that we possibly can on the operation, and they will simply say yes, they can go, or no, they can't. We won't have to ask a lot of intrusive questions. So I think that there's some pros and cons to that, and I'm interested in seeing what the changes are going to look like. All right, then we will assign in the door, we will assign that worker to the disaster. We give them an assignment date. It automatically populates to today. The departure date automatically populates to tomorrow. We want them to be allowed to leave anytime. They should arrive the same day as they depart. And transportation type is usually flying, but sometimes we'll be driving. And if they need a rental car, then we go to Resource Mobilization Support, RMS. Nicole Privernow will help us get them a car. So this is everything that happens in the chapter territory. We hope that your local engagement leads or your local deployment coordinators or your DPM, DPS, or whoever it is that's taking the responsibility for deploying your workers from the chapter or territory can go through all of this process with the potential disaster responder. During Hurricane Harvey, we got into a practice that I would like to continue, and that is after they have all of this, they're all arranged, they're ready to go, that I was meeting with them in a conference call setting. I was having conference calls like every day at noon or every other day at noon or something like that. I don't quite remember. That anybody who was set to go out the next day or the next day or two would join. And we do expect people to deploy within 24 hours of assigning, sometimes in 48 hours, depending on the situation and how many open requests there are on the door, what those specialized open requests might be. But mostly we expect them to go within 24 hours. And so they were joining a conference call at noon the day before they left. And I was giving them an orientation. Now, I like this practice. To me, it felt like I had some quality control over making certain that this information got shared and it got followed up with an email, so they got almost everything in writing. I don't have to be the one who does it, but nobody may deploy without an orientation. So I'd like to, if we're getting ramping up into a larger operation as the hurricanes are going to start we're going to be starting to be involved in hurricanes. I like the quality control of it. So I have an orientation. It's usually about 20 minutes, conference call in. I talk about what hardship codes are and what they mean. Set the expectations for sleeping in a staff shelter and packing accordingly. Point them to some YouTube videos that help them pack nicely. Remind them that their mission card will probably not work at the airport. So in order to pay for one checked bag, they will need cash, and Red Cross expects to pay for one checked bag only. So we'll talk about the best ways to pack. Remind them again that the days are long and the work is physically demanding. So they need to be certain that this is a good decision for them to make, and certainly always emphasize that even turning it down after you've accepted a work assignment, it's much better than getting there and finding your way out of your depth, and this is way much more than you wanted. Reflects poorly on the disaster responder, not at all. So letting them make sure we're talking about not just being flexible, but what flexibility means. The lack of housing is one that I think is good to highlight. We don't want to compete with our clients for lodging. If the entire city is underwater, hotels are also going to be underwater, so you might be staying out a good way from the city center. So a lot of things that are details that people who have not been involved with this before might easily just not anticipate. Asking them to assume positive intent. We are all in this together, and while hundreds of people deploying to an operation means that you have at least 600 different opinions and ways of dealing with stress and strain and long, hard working conditions, assume that you are all there to help. We're all in this together. I always ask them to manage up, to make sure that you don't know the difference between a volunteer and a paid staffer on an operation. You have no idea who is seasoned and who is not. People are thrown into positions of leadership, not necessarily always because they are deserving of them. So helping your supervisor and your manager manage and supervise you. Don't let them forget about you. Help them remember your day off. Make sure that, I've had folks who have sat on an operation for 4 or 5 days in a row. In a way, I put it back on them. Why would you sit and do nothing for 4 or 5 days in a row instead of finding your supervisor or changing activities so that you're being of use? So that I make sure that they understand that staff services is there to work for the responders. Staff services clients are our deployed workforce. Staff wellness, the same thing. Please don't share the crud. Take the days off. Get the medical attention that you need. There might come up a question. We want to make sure that folks know that Red Cross doesn't cover their medical while they're deployed. You know, it still is. You're a volunteer. You volunteered to be there. We can get you to and from a doctor, to and from a hospital, but it's their insurance or lack thereof that will be covering that. Making certain they understand the mission card, talking about the things that it does cover and the things that it doesn't. Making certain that they understand how to get to and from the airport. The mission card won't pay for airport parking, but it will pay for the transportation to and from. This one's a big one about any purchase on your mission card, $35 or more. Don't bring the receipts home. I don't want them. The money is being spent on the operation. It needs to go into the operation, and how to expect to reload the mission card. I might want to add some stuff here too about the mass care procurement card that's not on here, and the record keeping that is required about that. We might want to just say that to the people in particular who are going to take it with them if they are, because that is a shelter supervisor or other manager can use that card, so none of our SAs would need that information. So being on the lookout for the DRIS, the Disaster Responder Information System, the robocall and the email that they will receive twice daily until they arrive. It tells them what to do when they get off the airplane or arrive at headquarters. I make sure that they understand that when they arrive, they check in at headquarters, even if it is 7:59 p.m. and headquarters closes at 8 p.m. You check in at headquarters. If you check in at 8:01 and your instructions are to go to the hotel after 8, you go to the hotel. Follow the instructions. You really would hate to show up at headquarters and everything's shut and closed down for the night because you didn't follow instructions. You would also hate to get the phone call. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you've gone directly to the hotel pool, and we're calling you wondering why you were not showing up for work because we had plans to put you in a shelter on the overnight shift. So just paying attention, and it's so much information for somebody who's going out for the first time, but this will all also go to them in writing. And so then the email that I follow up, the email letting them have all this information in writing. We give them disaster responder information guide. We'll give them so much information and they can be reading it on the plane. Mission card holder instructions, let them know what they can use their mission card for, and they can read that on the plane. And then the concerns connection line to make sure that they are aware that anything hinky on the operation, you've got some places to go with it. First year supervisor and manager. You can go to the staff advocate. You can go to staff relations. You can go to staff services. But if you need to, you've got the concerns connection to report anything concerning on the operation. And then we ask our local workforce, those who are deploying our workforce, to activate the mission card, to provide the responder with an unopened red envelope and have them sign the mission card authority form, which I tell them means don't use the mission card on booze and women. And then to send the email to RMS, disaster staff card, to load the card. I do get a lot of people who send me the mission card proxy to load for them. A lot of DPMs send it to me to load for them, and I don't mind doing that, but just realizing that it's a delay. If you're sitting there with your disaster responder and you're handing them the mission card and they're ready to leave, but they need to get cash off before they get on the airplane, etc., it's a delay to send that information to me when you can just go ahead and send it to RMS yourself. So that is in here. And then the welcome the responders home. We are going to do the post-deployment interview with each returning responder and provide the information to the DWEM, which is me. And of course, this is going to be built out because we're trying to make this a more robust and deliberate welcome home. We hope you are coping. Here's some recognition and some swag for you kind of a thing, which is still in its early stages, but we are working on getting that built up. And then the DPM information all down here at the bottom so that our local deploying workforce know who to contact to make sure that our responder is really ready to go. And that is where I'm pausing again and saying that's what I was going to talk about, how to deploy our workforce. I talked a lot. What questions do you have?
questions at all.
Fantastic. All right, well, I'm going to be uploading this to YouTube and sharing the link, especially for those who were not able to join the call today. And like I said, this is sort of an ongoing conference call series every month for anyone who joins our disaster workforce engagement team in whatever capacity, so that they can catch up and feel fully ready to engage and deploy our workforce. So thanks for joining today. Let me know if I can do anything else to make this a better conference call series going forward.
Thanks, Catherine.
You are welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm ending the call. Have a lovely Thursday.